everybody. So we are so excited. We are here to talk about the latest stop motion animated film from director Wes Anderson. We are talking The Isle of Dogs, and my friend Conrado is here to talk about it.
Time for a podcast. Rachel,
Yay!
you are my dear friend. Snow falls on the pines. It's the little poem that I wrote on the occasion.
Oh, this is very exciting. Yeah, so you're joining us all the way from Peru. This is really fun.
Yes, I am away for a couple of months doing some work and also some vacation, but I'm glad to be joining you.
Yeah,
And I'm glad that I got to see this movie on the big screen before I left.
Yeah, me too. So I think we should probably start just talking about your overall sort of Wes Anderson fandomhood, I guess you might say. And I'll start. So I actually haven't seen all of his movies, and I would say I'm in general a fan, and I have been more a fan of his recent movies than his early movies. I feel like he's gotten a little bit softer in recent movies. I wasn't a big fan of Rushmore because I know that's like blasphemous to say, but it was a little mean-spirited in my opinion. And I don't know. I like in recent movies, I just feel like it's more my taste as far as tone and style. But because I really liked Grand Budapest Hotel, and I really liked Moonrise Kingdom and Fantastic Mr. Fox, and so like more recent movies. I enjoyed the Darjeeling one pretty good, but some of his early stuff just is a little, I don't know, just not quite as tonally my style, if that makes sense. But overall, I would say I'm a fan. What about you?
I am a huge fan, I would say. I would say he is probably one of my favorite directors ever. His style and his sort of pet themes speak to me in a very personal level, I guess. I don't know. I'm a huge fan of his. I like all of his movies to different degrees. I will agree with you that I also think that he has really, even though I like his early stuff, I think he's become better as he's gone along. And I think his recent movies, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Moonrise Kingdom, Grand Budapest, they were all like, the next one was better than the one that came before, and he just kept going up and up, in my opinion. Yeah. And I think Grand Budapest is his masterpiece so far.
Yeah, agreed. And so, what are your thoughts on Fantastic Mr. Fox? What did you think about that?
I think it's great. Fantastic Mr. Fox. I think we've talked about this in the past about Roald Dahl adaptations and how they're kind of tricky. Yeah. Or maybe I've seen you tweet about it. And I agree with that. I think it's hard to capture that tone. And I think because Wes Anderson has such a specific style and such a unique way of doing things, it felt very fresh. It didn't feel like he was just trying to capture the original. He was putting a spin on it, and I think it worked really well. And and that animation is beautiful.
Oh yeah, I really enjoyed it too. I think that the animation was amazing. I love stop motion animation. I'm a huge fan of whether it's Leica or these independent ones, or something like Frankenweenie. I just love stop motion. I think it's so cool, and that movie has such attention to detail that makes it very fun, I think. And I think that the of course all the voice cast is really good, and it's funny, and so I enjoy Fantastic Mr. Fox quite a bit. And so what was your overall sort of feeling about this movie, response to this movie?
Isle of Dogs?
Isle of Dogs, yeah.
I am a little conflicted about Isle of Dogs because, huge Wes Anderson fan. I think they're very interesting and very effective things in this movie in
Mm-hmm.
many ways. As far as the animation, the style, and the themes are concerned, I
Uh-huh.
think there's a lot of good stuff there. But then there's other stuff that I find a little less successful. Most of all, my big question is, why on earth is this movie set in Japan? I
Mm-hmm.
still can't fully understand what the movie was supposed to gain from that decision
Mm-hmm.
in a meaningful way, right? I mean, obviously, we can talk about this
Yeah.
later more, but in more detail. But I think Anderson was definitely interesting in all of this Japanese imagery and style. I don't know if thematically, if there was something important to say by setting the movie in Japan.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that. I just thought it was so charming. I was really swept away by it. I don't know. I feel like just in my first we've both only seen it one time. So
Mhm.
it's sort of a initial response. But my initial response was maybe I liked it even better than Fantastic Mr. Fox. Like I just felt like it was funnier and just like a little bit there were a little bit better paced and I don't know. It was just so different and so unpredictable and so unique. And so I was really charmed by it. I really enjoyed it. And I'm very looking forward to seeing it again and looking for, I don't know, just all those little details you miss on the first watch.
Mhm.
But I can understand some of the conflict that you're talking about. But just as an animation fan, I was just sort of swept away and really enjoyed it. So uh, let's
Yeah.
let's dive
Um,
in and talk
yeah.
about it.
I will say I agree with you that there's so much there, and there's so much in the movie that works so well,
Yeah.
and it's so well made that the things that I didn't love about it, it was almost heartbreaking, right? Because I really wanted to love the movie, and then there was just these things that didn't
Yeah.
quite work for me.
Fair enough.
So, so I think conflicted is
Yeah.
it's a very good way to describe how I feel about it.
Yeah, that's understandable. Let's talk about the overall sort of setting and what we're doing here. So this is a dystopian Japan. And I guess like maybe we'll just dive into this right away. Like
Hmm.
I kind of felt like this was sort of a little bit of an I kind of thought it kind of made me feel like similar to a lot of anime that has been set
Mhm.
in dystopian Japan. And I don't know for a fact that that's why he decided to do what he did. And maybe it's more forgivable in anime like Akira or Ghost in the Shell or like these classic anime films in dystopian Japan. Maybe it's more forgivable there because it's actually made by Japanese people than with Wes Anderson. But that's kind of, I don't know, like nobody watches Akira and says, oh, this is an inaccurate depiction of Japan, like
Hmm.
because it's
Oh, I
dystopian.
see.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Okay. Yeah, yeah. I was having trouble a little following you there, but I think I get what you mean. Well, I guess what we're talking about the fact that the depiction of Japan in this movie is clearly not a realistic depiction of
yeah,
Japanese society as it exists in the real world,
right.
right?
Yeah,
And that is common for Wes Anderson. He's done the same thing with other places and other cultures. In the Royal Tenenbaums, you have this version of New York that is completely fantastical, and
yeah,
there are names of streets and places and things that don't exist in real New York. There is this fantastic version of Europe in Grand Budapest Hotel and India in Darjeeling Limited.
yeah.
So he's doing the same thing here with Japan. Uh, but I guess the difference is that when you do it to a foreign culture, and especially as a white man from America,
Hmm.
I think that's when things start to get into the you know uh, into complicated politics and that sort of
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
So I think
I,
that's what a lot of people are responding to, and to a degree, that's also the
mhm.
things that made me a little uncomfortable about the movie as
Yeah.
well.
Well, so this dystopian Japan, and there's this dog virus, and there's this uh, there's this little prologue at the beginning where they talk about the history of the Kobayashi family that hates the dogs, and they sign a decree of the mayor signs a decree of banishing all the dogs and
Mhm.
to this trash island. And it was kind of funny for me, full disclosure, because the company that I work for is called Kobayashi Incorporated.
Mhm.
um, and they're completely lovely, and they've been so good to me, and they're great. But it was just really funny. I sent an email to my boss, and I'm like, so I was like, this is the latest character, Kobayashi. I was like, and he was like, oh wow, he looks really mean. I'm like, yeah, he hates dogs. Who hates dogs? Like whatever. It was funny, and that was, it's like a pretty big. I don't know if it was an intentional jab, because it is a pretty big company in Japan, but anyway, that made me laugh. Kobayashi. But
Yeah.
you have this mayor, and what do you think that Anderson was? Do you feel like there was a strong metaphor here that he was talking about with this banishing of the dogs?
Hmm. I think there's definitely something there. I'm not sure if I'm completely sure exactly what it is. I might have to see the movie again or think about it a little more. But I think there's definitely a trend in his movies in which he has he has this very whimsical, sort of quirky style to all
Uh-huh.
of his stuff. And
Yeah.
I feel like he's always kind of put that in contrast with some pretty like emotional or dark stuff, right? And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
early in his career used to be like things about dysfunctional families or the personal depression, that sort of thing. And I think as things have gone on, he's starting to move into bigger sort of almost uh, philosophical or political concerns, right?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
in Grand Budapest you can see this whole idea of the rise of uh, the Nazis before World War II and that sort of darkness. And you get something similar here with this sort of evil dictator in Japan
Yeah.
and the banishing of all these dogs who definitely
Yeah.
strike me like some sort of metaphor for, like any kind of oppressed, almost like the X-Men, right? That you can see
Mm.
them as any kind of oppressed minority almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's sort of a trademark of dystopians too, in general. That they're usually sort of a metaphor for different things going on in our society, and
Yes.
whether it's Fahrenheit 451 or
Mhm.
1984 or whatever it might be.
Yeah. You're
Anyway,
talking about how every movie about robots is really a movie about slaves?
yeah, I never thought about that, but yeah, I can see that. And certainly that's true with Ghost in the Shell and with Akira, and Japanese dystopians that have strong metaphors. You have this banishment, and Kobayashi, the mayor, has a ward who is named Atari, who decides to run away from home. He steals this plane, and he goes and to Trash Island to find his dog, who he loves.
Mhm.
And he crashes, and he's rescued by there's 5 main dogs. You have Rex, King, Duke, Boss, and Chief. And
Mhm.
what did you think of these 5 dogs?
Um, I think they were cool. So they're voiced by these, most of them are voiced by frequent Anderson
Yeah.
collaborators. You have Edward Norton, Bob Balaban, Jeff Goldblum, and Bill Murray. And then the main dog, Chief, right, is the main dog? Or is
Mhm,
it Duke?
mhm.
I can't remember right now. But
Chief.
the main
Yeah.
chief, right? And the main dog is voiced by Bryan Cranston, an actor who I usually don't like. I feel like he's a bit of a ham, but
Mm.
I think it works here because it's only his voice. So
Mhm.
and Anderson's style is pretty reserved as far as emotion is concerned. So I think he does a really good job here,
Yeah.
as the main dog.
Yeah.
And the other dogs they all have like their thing and they're all charming. My favorite was Jeff Goldblum. I don't remember the name
Yeah.
of the dog,
Duke.
but he's like a husky. Is he Duke?
Yeah, he is
Yeah, he's
Duke.
the one who's got all the rumors. He's like a dog who keeps saying, "Oh, did you hear about the rumor about this and about that?" I thought he was really funny.
Yeah, he was so funny. I really liked all of the dogs. I thought that the humor pretty much all worked in this movie. I was laughing throughout. I thought it was
Well,
funny.
yeah, I think the humor, I think as far as comedy, the idea is basically, what if you could have all these sort of stereotypes that or the behavior of a dog, like cartoonishly, what we think of how
Yeah.
a dog behaves, and apply it to like a Wes Anderson sort of character.
Yeah.
And I think it works. I think it's really
Yeah.
funny.
I think so too. It kind of reminded me of uh the the dogs in Up a little bit, but more
Yeah,
droll. But I don't know, some of
that's a great
those. Yeah.
that's a great comparison. It's that sort of humor, and I think it works, because it's the same idea, but I think it's executed in a
Yeah.
different way, right? Because,
Yeah.
like you say, it's more droll. The sort of comedy is a little darker and a little
Yeah.
drier, and it works really well.
Yeah, and we should say this is PG-13 movie. It's more for more mature. This is not for little kids.
Yeah, it's got some disturbing elements in them, as far as, I guess I would say violence. It's cartoonish violence, but there's a lot of, dog on dog
Yeah.
violence, and these dogs are basically like, exiled to this trash island, and they're
Yeah.
like, they struggle to get food, and some of them are
Yeah.
victims of like medical sort of experiments. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah. So, I mean, everybody's kids are different, but just make sure you know your kids, I guess, if you
Mhm.
take them to see this movie. But I loved I thought it was amazing the fur on these dogs, how they were able to get that with the stop motion. Like it looked so good, and just all the animation blew me away.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you mentioned the fur, because I
Oh,
think if you know anything about stop motion animation and how it works, seeing the way the fur almost like just ruffles in the wind is incredible. It's
yeah.
so seamless, and it looks so good and so effortless when you
Yeah.
know that it took so long and it had to be moved one frame at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, yeah. Anyone who knows about it has to be. I feel like everyone who is like an animation person and has seen the movie has mentioned the fur,
Mm.
at least as far as I have seen.
Yeah, it was amazing. I can't wait to get the art book of this movie because I'm so curious about how they made everything look the way it looked. And the I loved the backgrounds. Like I thought it was so amazing. There's these all these scenes with where I think there's like they're supposed to be around glass, and it looks so cool. It looks like this like stained glass um kind of effect to it, and that was my favorite of the backgrounds. But all pretty much all the backgrounds I thought were incredible, with such attention to detail. And like honestly, if like the Academy were more open-minded, I think it should be nominated for production design,
Hmm.
because I thought it was so beautiful, even though it's
That would
trash.
be, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that would be well deserved, and it's kind of crazy that only one of Wes Anderson's movies has been nominated for production design, considering how he is known for the look of his movies and all these like sets that he creates.
Is that true? I didn't
It
know that. Oh my
Yeah, it
gosh.
was only Grand Budapest which won, but before that, none of them got nominated, which is kind of crazy when you
That
think
is
about
crazy. That's ridiculous. But anyway, yeah, I just thought all of the set pieces looked so cool. Whether it was in Japan and just the attention to detail in the backgrounds was really cool, or on the island, uh, it was neat. Anyway, and so this Atari character, what did you think about him? Did you think he was sweet? A sweet character?
Uh, yeah, I think Atari, of the human characters, I think Atari is the one that works the best for
Hmm.
me.
Yeah.
Because he is the one who is most closely related to the dog plot line. He's
Hmm.
the one who's interacting with all the dogs. And I think you can almost see this movie as two halves, the story with the dogs and the story with the back in mainland Japan with the
Yeah.
humans.
Yeah.
And I think the dog part is the one that works best, and that would say, uh, yeah, it just works. It's like that's the portion of the movie that I don't really have a lot of
Mhm.
issues with.
Yeah.
And
I like,
yeah.
even though I'm actually not like a big animal person as far as my own owning animals, I
Hmm.
do love movies with like a boy and his dog, or I animal
Hmm.
movies in that regard. And that was very sweet.
And the
Uh,
relationship works,
yeah.
because it's not only with the dog that he's looking for spots, but also with Chief, who
Yeah.
is sort of the leader of this pack of dogs. But he's
Yeah.
also he didn't have an owner before he was sent to the
Yeah.
island, so he thinks of himself as a stray, and
Yeah.
he's reluctant to accept Atari as one of them. And their relationship, the way it develops, it was very sweet, very effective.
It is. I agree. It was very sweet, and so yeah, and some people heard said that, oh well, there's not enough story here, but for me, I that wasn't a problem for me. I felt like it was a little road trip movie.
Yeah.
Basically, I was fine with it.
Are these people referring just to the dog part of the movie? Because I think there's a lot of story, like
Yeah.
much more story than the movie needs to have. Almost, I feel like this dog part, which is like you say, like a little road trip sort of
Yeah.
adventure,
Yeah.
is more than enough. And then there you have all this other stuff happening with all these other characters that I think is what the movie doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
need
Yeah.
in order
Yeah.
to
And
work.
you could make an argument that there's too much story.
Yeah, I would say that as well. There's
Yeah.
too many plot lines.
Yeah. Yeah. Have this going back to the Japan storyline, you have these scientists who basically discover a cure for the dog virus, but Kobayashi like basically tears it up and squashes it, and uh, yeah, so that was interesting, and then there is this character who is a student, and that kind of brings us a foreign exchange student, and that kind of brings us to his decision to have the movie in Japanese, the
Mm,
characters, and not be
yeah.
translated in subtitles.
I think that's important
Yes.
to describe, because it's a little complicated, but I think it's the most fundamental element that makes me that I don't that that
Yeah.
brings back all the problems that I have with the movie.
Yeah.
Is so basically, like Rachel says, the dogs all speak in English, and the Japanese characters all speak in Japanese, and it is not translated with subtitles. It is only translated when there is a translator character who translates
Yeah.
the stuff into English. Otherwise, they just speak Japanese and it goes without subtitles,
Yeah.
without a translation. And uh, I don't
Which
know how you felt about that choice,
I felt
Rachel.
like it was a bold and interesting choice, and I kind of appreciate it on that level. I like you go to movies and it feels like, well, this is exactly the same as everything that I've seen a million times. And so
Hmm.
it was kind of nice in a way because it made it unpredictable, and I really didn't know what characters were going to be doing, or who was going to what it was going to do, but it did create a couple problems for sure,
Yeah.
because you want to have this uprising against Kobayashi and against things, but how do you have that and not have us understand what the character is saying? So
Right.
that sort of forced him, I think, into having this character be a foreign exchange student versus being a Japanese character. And
Hmm.
because otherwise, how would we understand what she is saying? And so that did create a kind of a white savior moment, which was
Yeah.
I personally had more of a, it wasn't, I still give it a very high grade, so it wasn't a deal breaker for me. But I had more of an issue with that than say like it being a Japanese dystopian, was that like so many movies, they have to tell another, even a farce, a fake version of a fictional version of a culture. They have to tell it through white eyes and white narrative, you know, like movies like Glory and movies like things like that, you know, that's like you got to have the, or like your Dances with Wolves, or, you know, there's just so many movies where it's like you got to have the white person in the culture explaining the culture. Not saying those movies are bad, but it just, I just feel like it forced him into a corner where he had to make this person an American to tell the story.
It's very frustrating, not only because of, you know, even if you're not super invested in trying to get more diverse stories to be told and the sort of like social and political aspects of it, it is just kind of boring at this point because we've gotten so many, and that's like the only perspective that we get. So it feels like, you say, it feels like the same thing over and over again, and that is frustrating on one level. And then you have this other level about what he's trying to say about Japan and how Japan is depicted in the movie and Japanese people. I think there is, which brings us back to the decision to have the characters speak in Japanese. Like you say, I agree with you that it's, I guess it's a cool choice. In theory, I think every time that we hear a language that is not English in an American movie, I get excited, at least a little bit, just because it feels like sometimes we're so trapped, and, you know, we set movies in foreign places and then just people speak with like weird, in English with weird German or Russian accents or something. And so it's cool to get to hear the language. But it creates a couple problems, not even with the Tracy character, but I think it goes a little further than that. I think that the Japanese works really well with Atari in terms of, because I think it's clear there that what he wanted was for us to have the perspective of the dogs. So he drops this human character and he has him speak in a language that is different from the dogs, so that we are seeing the story from the dog's perspective more so than the human. It's almost like a flipping of things and making the human the different character, right? Usually in a movie, the dog would be the one that we can't fully understand and communicate with, and in this case it's kind of flipped, and it's the human, and we get all the dog's perspective, and the human is sort of the animal almost, right? So I thought that worked really well. I am not totally sure that having him speak Japanese was the best decision, just considering the history of how Japanese and Asian people have been depicted in movies. I feel like there's this sort of way in which, especially Asian characters in movies, have always been depicted as sort of like aliens or cultures that can't fully be understood, or are like a little kooky, and they're just like the weird ones, you know. And I think you get a little bit of that by having them speak Japanese. We can't fully get into the perspective of these characters. We have to approach them through the dogs or through the white character or the translator character, and so they seem like they seem foreign to a degree that it's frustrating in a movie that is, you know, supposed to be and celebrate Japanese culture.
I think we're both kind of saying similar things, that it forced him to kind of have a outsider kind of perspective in this, where it should have felt sort of more immersive, even if this is a fictional version of Japan. I don't know, it was a bold choice. It was an interesting choice. And so I guess I kind of cut him a little slack, because I appreciate directors that make bold choices. But yeah, I don't think it entirely worked. I agree with you that it didn't work. And I do agree that it's kind of interesting that you have this whole like student uprising kind of thing, and this movie just is, obviously it was coincidence, but as we've had student uprising in the last couple months, so it was kind of
Mm.
interesting on that level, but it didn't really work super well. This character.
He is definitely very interested in Japanese culture and Japanese art and imagery, right? And everything looks beautiful, and he has a blast depicting all this sort of Japanese paintings
Oh
and
yeah,
using the design and all of that to
and the
like create
sushi
this
scene.
beautiful the sushi scene.
Oh
So everything that you like, almost like everything that one can free associate with Japan. If someone tells you, you know, gives you a piece of paper and says you have 5 minutes to write down everything you know about Japanese culture, almost all of it is depicted in one way in the movie, and he has a lot of fun doing that. But I don't know if it is essential to the plot or the themes of the movie, and that's kind of the disconnect that I feel about the movie. It
yeah.
was kind of, I guess it's set in Japan just because it is a cool setting, but I don't know. I feel like there's something missing there in that
Mhm.
connection that I would want it for it to fully justify itself, right? I
Yeah.
feel like at this point, if especially if you're gonna make all these choices about which characters do and don't speak Japanese, which characters we get to see from our perspective and which ones we don't, there's a lot of complicated stuff there that isn't
Yeah.
fully working, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fair. It's fair. It wasn't a deal breaker. It sounds like it bothered you more than it bothered me, but I it's a valid complaint for sure. I get it.
Mhm.
Um and but I appreciated that I didn't feel like it was too heavy-handed as far as the metaphor or as far as the messaging. Like, I could definitely see people
Mhm.
walking away with different interpretations. Like, there's some people that are going to be like, Kobayashi is Donald Trump and whatever, and that's a valid interpretation. There's people who could walk away with other interpretations and more broad interpretations. And I don't know. I
Mhm.
just feel like that. I appreciate that he tried different things, and that's like a bold. I feel like it's a bold, interesting movie that, and it was funny. It had sweet characters. So I agree, not every choice worked,
Mhm.
but I would say, uh, nothing was a deal breaker for me. Nothing turned me off from the movie, personally. And I do want
Uh-huh.
to mention real quick the music I thought was
Mm.
excellent throughout
Uh,
the film. What did you
again,
think?
Alexandre Desplat, who did the score for Anderson's last three movies, he comes back and he has this very, there's a lot of Japanese flute, I think, and there's a lot of taiko drums in the score, which is it's cool. I think the score
Yeah.
works,
Yeah.
and it's very beautiful. He's a great composer. He just won the Oscar for a second time this year for Shape of Water, which is also a lovely score.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
he's
and
great.
he's doing a great job. I will say, like you say, I think the movie is open to different interpretations. I personally am not totally sure what my ultimate interpretation of the themes is.
Yeah,
Maybe I have to see it again.
me too.
I have the suspicion that maybe that is another thing that I'm a little disappointed by. I feel like the movie could be a little clearer about uh, what it's trying to say, and I think it might have to do the muddy parts of the message. I think might have to do with this whole uh, Japanese and perspective thing about the characters,
Yeah.
uh, of exactly which characters are we supposed to sympathize with.
Hmm.
Um, but I will say that just as you talk about like general final thoughts about the
Hmm.
movie, I guess
Yeah.
I think I would recommend it to people, not only because it is because I think stop motion animation is my favorite kind of animation, and it usually doesn't do crazy well at the box office. So I would like I'm always, banging the drum for any stop motion movie.
Yeah.
And this one's particularly beautiful. It's very well made. There's a lot of good stuff in it. And even the stuff that doesn't quite work, all these questions about the depiction of Japan and what's exactly going on there, I think that can also be a moment for people to see the movie and just like, uh, even if they are Japanese or not, or if they are Asian or not, just, see how you feel about it.
Yeah.
Think why people have responded the way they have to the depiction of Japan here. I know, for example, that when there are like stereotypical depictions of Latin American culture, I react in similar ways. And I think it's interesting to think about these questions of how are we, how do our directors and our producers depicting different cultures on screen. I would also recommend an essay by Alison Wilmore on BuzzFeed about which starts talking about Isle of Dogs and then it moves into other pieces of media that depict Asian countries and characters, about Orientalism.
Mm-hmm.
I think she lays out a very interesting points about how these things affect different people and how it's not so much a conversation about what should and shouldn't be done, but more about hearing the responses that different people have to this sort of thing and listening to each other, which I think is important.
I completely agree with you. I think that it's a movie that makes interesting choices, and so I'm very curious to know what people think about those choices, and I'm very curious for my audience that's a pretty animation savvy audience. I'm curious to know what you all think about this movie in comparison to some of the ones I brought up, but even something like Kubo and the Two Strings, and like I said, Akira, Ghost in the Shell, so many other movies that have dystopian. I mean, Kubo isn't really dystopian, but I don't know, just a similar stop motion attempt to tell a Japanese story in a way. And I'm just curious to know from people listening how you think this compares, and what you think it got right, what you think maybe could have been better. But overall, I left the theater just feeling charmed and feeling like I had laughed a lot, feeling like I had been dazzled by beautiful animation, and and uh, and just feeling like I had gotten a sweet, original, unpredictable story, and I really enjoyed it. And so I definitely recommend that you go and see it, and let's have a discussion about some of these things. And so I appreciate that we have directors like Wes Anderson, and for me, somebody like Pete Docter, people like that who are trying new ideas, who are thinking in the world of animation, and not just giving us another Minions movie or whatever, that we're getting this. And so it was a real treat to see. And so I appreciate you talking about it with me. I think this has been a really interesting discussion, and to an interesting film. So
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure to be on the show.
oh, thanks. And so where can people find you and your blog and everything?
Yeah, so I've been disconnected for a couple days because I was in the Amazon, but now I'm back to civilization, and should be tweeting more and hopefully writing more on my blog. You can find me on Twitter at Coco Hits New York, and you can also find me at my blog and my writing at Coco Hits New York. Sorry, that's cocohitsny.wordpress.com.
Great. And you can find me here at Rachel's Reviews on iTunes and on YouTube. And so check that out. And I'm really excited over on my Hallmarkies podcast. We are going to be interviewing the film critic Alonso Duralde. It's going to post on Monday. So make sure that you're subscribed, even if you don't watch any Hallmark movies. It's actually a really fun podcast because we have pretty fun chemistry. And
Hmm.
so subscribe to that, or at least keep an eye out for that interview, because I'm really excited about it. So a lot of fun stuff happening right now in my life. So
Mm-hmm.
make sure you're following us, and let us know what you thought of Isle of Dogs. Did you like it? What did you think? And thanks so much. And we'll talk again soon. We actually have some really fun podcast ideas in the coming up between the two of us. I'm really excited about.
Yes, I will be back, and we
Yes.
will be having some fun in the future.
Yes. All
All
right.
right.
Well, thanks so much, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.